What's going on, listeners? This is the first episode of the BLC, the Bigfoot Legends and Connections podcast. We're going to kick things off with the intro to give everyone an idea about what this podcast is all about. After that, we're going to be hearing some of the stories that I'll be retelling, stories that convinced me of the legitimacy of the phenomena that we call Sasquatch. So my question for all the Bigfoot believers and skeptics alike is this: how do you reconcile the fact that literally every culture in the world today has legends and connections to the creature we often refer to as Bigfoot, dating back to the dawn of time? Is this just coincidence, or is it something more? Why do all the stories contain the same recurring descriptions and themes? Whether they call them Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Yeti, Yeren, Skunk Ape, Yowie, or some other name, the reports are all the same. From America to China, the Himalayas to Australia, literally every continent has the same phenomenon. Why do we see such similarities? How could this story permeate throughout the entire globe? Is there definitive proof of the existence of Bigfoot? That's what I'm on a mission to figure out. Join me as we uncover the stories, the evidences, and the unbelievable yet true events that have occurred all throughout the world. My goal is to turn skeptics into believers, and believers into knowers. I'm Riley Woolner, and welcome to the Bigfoot Legends and Connections podcast. So, like I said at the beginning of the episode, I want to start off with a little bit of background about myself, why I'm interested in the whole topic of Bigfoot, why I think it's important, and I'm going to be giving you guys a few stories that really helped me to understand what this whole phenomenon is about, because I feel like many people really don't understand the massive amount of Bigfoot information there is out there. Often it's been turned into a sort of cultural punchline, and there's so much more to it than that. So I grew up in the Pacific Northwest of the United States. For those who are unfamiliar with the geography of North America, go ahead and take out a map and take a look at the map of the United States, and you will see that the three West Coast states are Washington, Oregon, and California. Now, the Pacific Northwest is not simply Washington and Oregon. Many people just simply think that anywhere in those parts of the states is going to be considered the Northwest. Well, when we're talking about the Pacific Northwest, although geographically that might make sense, really there's sort of a weather and culture kind of component to all of this. So if you were to look on that map, there is a range of mountains known as the Cascades that extend from British Columbia in southern Canada all through Washington, Oregon, down into California. You might have heard of Mount St. Helens, or possibly even Mount Hood, or Mount Jefferson, Mount Rainier. These are all part of the Cascade Range. And anywhere east of the Cascades in Oregon and most of Washington, you're going to see an equally beautiful part of the United States, but it is a lot more high desert and more prairies and plains that extend on over to Idaho. But anywhere west of the Cascade Range is a fertile and green part of the United States that is known as the Pacific Northwest. And not only is it beautiful in its geography, it's covered in, like I said, the grass almost seems to radiate with its verdant color, especially when you've been away for a while and you go back and you see just how green it is. You have miles and miles covered in forests of Douglas firs and giant oak trees, and it's got the coast of the Pacific Ocean that runs all along the western portion of the Pacific Northwest, which has a huge impact on the culture and the weather. It rains a lot in this region of the United States, hence why it's so green. And if you're gonna sort of, I feel like most people would agree that, like I said, the majority of British Columbia, if not at least just the south portion of British Columbia, Canada, Washington, Oregon, and even Northern California, anywhere west of that Cascade Range is the visual that people will get when you think of the Pacific Northwest. And I grew up in southern Washington, as well as in the Willamette Valley of Oregon, and all until my young adult years, where I then lived in South America, in Peru, and after that in Hawaii, as well as now in Idaho and Utah, where I currently live. I went to college in Idaho, and currently my wife and I live here in the Beehive State, here in Utah. So knowing that I grew up in the Pacific Northwest might help some people understand why I have a fascination with the whole Bigfoot topic. It is definitely an aspect of the culture out here, but it is more popular for some than it is for others. The way I grew up, I didn't really feel like Bigfoot was necessarily something unique to the Pacific Northwest. Although once I left and I realized that I didn't see as many Bigfoot stickers on the back of people's cars, I realized that maybe we did have something a little unique. Now, like I said in the intro, Bigfoot is not unique to the Pacific Northwest. It is found throughout the United States, and not only are they found throughout the United States, but throughout the world as a whole. But for whatever reason, probably because the Patterson-Gimlin footage, which is the most famous footage of Bigfoot that has ever existed, was filmed in Northern California, and hence, due to the film, we have sort of a cultural legacy that spread throughout that region of the United States. So the Pacific Northwest kind of became known as Bigfoot country. And growing up, I always knew that there was rumored to be the big forest giant running through our woods, but it didn't really hold much gravitas in my mind because it wasn't ever really taken seriously by anyone I knew growing up. It was always a sort of a fun story told around the campfire about someone coming across the big guy out in the forest, and it was usually something that we all kind of chuckled about while making s'mores. And it wasn't until later that I realized that people had real experiences with these creatures, and it wasn't it's not just a campfire story. So that's kind of what I'm wanting to start off this first episode with, is some of those stories that got me wondering, got me scratching my head, got me wondering about the reality of this subject. And it wasn't until I was a married man working on a ferry as a summer job between college semesters that I came to realize that the subject of Sasquatch was much more than just a fun bit of folklore meant to give your youngsters a fright while roasting marshmallows, like I said. And I can remember the day that this happened very clearly. It was a summer day in 2018, and I was in my early 20s. And like I said, I'd been working as working on a ferry that went across one of the many rivers that goes through the Willamette Valley. And it was a small river, it was a small ferry, and we would get, I want to say, around 12 cars onto the ferry and would float on along across the river and let everyone off. Very often it was farm labor that was using this ferry. And My captain was named Scott, and Scott was a real salt of the earth kind of guy. He rode a motorcycle, had a bit of a mullet, and just like I said, salt of the earth kind of guy. I am not going to try and describe him too much further. I have lost contact with him, um, and so I don't want to. I don't want anyone to get any sort of wrong impression about him. He was very smart. He was extremely knowledgeable about history and mythology, and definitely knew quite a bit of the conspiracy theories that are popular in our day and age. And I quickly realized this, and I said to him, you know what, one day I said, Scott, how about this? I'm going to play a game. I'm just going to mention a certain, a topic, a often taboo topic, and see what you have to say about it. And the first one that came to mind, of course, was Bigfoot. And at this point in my life, like I said, I liked the idea of Bigfoot. I thought it was a fun idea. I always liked the imagery of the big, upright, ape-like man beast running through our forests. And so I said, "What do you think about Bigfoot?" And he looked at me almost nonchalantly and said, "Yeah, those are real." And I was completely thrown off guard. I one, the fact that he answered so compellingly and without any reserve, and then two, that he said those are real. Because in my mind, I'd always sort of felt that, or it had never really been conveyed to me that Bigfoot was a species. I always assumed that Bigfoot was one beast, a cryptid creature that had found its way into our folklore as Americans. And when he said that, "Oh, those are real," I immediately was intrigued and said, "How do you know?" And he just looked at me and said, "Oh, I've seen them." Now I was really, really interested, because I had never yet met someone who claimed to have seen them. Usually the stories I heard around the fire were the story of this, or it was like the game of telephone. It was someone's story who told it to them, who was told by someone else, who was told by someone else, right? This guy looks at me and says, "I've seen them." So I badger him for more. And he was a little hesitant, because he told me that he assumed I was going to just make fun of him. And I told him, "Look, man, I'm open-minded, and I just want to hear the story. I will not make fun of you. I'll take you seriously, as long as you're not pulling my leg." And so he said, "All right." So Scott was probably in his late 40s, and he told me that back in the 80s, when he was a younger man, him and his dad were elk hunting in the Blues. The Blue Mountains are another mountain range that goes through Oregon. It's in eastern Oregon, and you kind of have to, if you're going on a trip to Idaho through the northern part of Oregon, you have to go over those mountains to get there. And it's a decent sized range. So I was familiar with this territory, and he told me that was where this took place. And for those who are unaware, it's pine country, and it's like I said, it's a decent elevation. And he said that this was around, I believe, like he said, it was in the 80s, and it was in March. And therefore, there was still a little bit of snow on the ground and a little bit chilly, but it's the beginning of spring in Oregon, and things were starting to warm up a little bit. And he claims that he told me that his dad stayed behind at camp, and that he started going along the game trail that they had found on his own. And while he was walking along, he hears some rustling in the bushes, probably about 100 yards from where he was walking. He assumes it's other hunters, and not wanting to interrupt their hunt, he ducks behind an upturned tree. a tree that had fallen over with its roots all splayed in various directions. And he dives behind that tree because he doesn't want to be interrupted on his hunt. He doesn't want to interrupt anyone else's. And he kind of peeks out over the roots to see, just out of curiosity, who these hunters were. He's told me that out of the bushes and out of the trees came not hunters, but an 8-foot tall, hair-covered woman humanoid being. He could tell it was a female because of the anatomy, and next to this creature was a smaller one, who he assumed it was the Bigfoot's young. And this one was around, I think he said 4 to 5 feet tall. And he could tell, of course, that it was younger. While he was looking at it, he snapped a twig, and this Sasquatch looked directly in his direction and saw him, made eye contact with him even. And as soon as this happened, he told me that she let out a bellow that sounded to him like a woman screaming and a lion roar combined. And as this occurred, he remembers feeling a sense of not just fear, but of this primal reaction to this yell, and where he almost felt paralyzed, and then he couldn't move. If I remember correctly, I want to say he told me that, and this isn't supposed to be funny, but that he wet himself because of how powerful of an effect this had on him. Once this Sasquatch had made this roar and had this territory claimed, the younger one started walking off into the brush again and started walking on the snow and leaving its smaller footprints behind. But the mother grabbed the younger one like a mom would her kid and pulled it off the snow. And then the mom used her own foot to sort of shuffle the snow so that way none of the younger's footprints could be found. Then, together, they ran up the side of the mountain that he was near and were out of sight. After that, my friend Scott's worldview completely changed. And of course, I asked him, "Now you're sure those weren't bears?" And he told me, "Look, man, I'm a big game hunter. I've hunted bears before. I've been up close and personal with bears. I know that what I saw weren't bears." And I said, "And you're sure it wasn't like a prank or something?" And he said, "Would a prank like that, if it were a prank, it would be the best prank that anyone has ever pulled on me, ever. But I can't, for the life of me, figure out why someone would pull a prank like that." And he's like, I am 100% positive it was not a prank. So I asked him, "So do you think these are, what do you think they are?" And he said, that's the big question. I have no idea. He's like, "I don't even know if I saw Sasquatch, because I don't know what Sasquatch is. But if you're asking me if I've seen an 8-foot tall human figure walking on 2 legs covered in fur and that lives out in the wilderness, then I've seen that. And I've seen that it has a child with it as well." His thought was that they were a tribe of people, that they were he said that the creature that had scared him, although it had many animalistic tendencies, did not strike him to be simply an animal. So after that encounter, my worldview was starting to change, because I trusted this guy. I didn't know him He wasn't like my brother or anything, but we'd worked together and he didn't have any reason to lie to me. He wasn't much of a joker, to be honest. He kind of took everything, pretty seriously in our job. And although he was entertaining to talk to, he didn't seem like the type to want to lie just to get a rise out of someone or to get a good laugh. And the way that he looked at me and said, "I've seen those," it struck something in me, and it reminded me of the few times that I had heard Bigfoot stories, and it made me want to find out more and look into this subject further. So after that moment, I spent my free time very often looking into the ends of the internet for anything I could about the whole Sasquatch phenomena, and turns out there was so much more than I ever thought there was. Once you got past the National Ge or the Animal Planet or Discovery Channel shows that make Bigfoot out to be a dumb ape running around in the forest, I quickly realized there was much more of a mysterious aspect to this phenomena than I was initially thinking. And I want to say it was within just a few days of me talking with Scott that I remembered about my buddy Scotty in high school. Different Scott. This is Scotty. My buddy Scotty in high school. Him and our other buddy Morgan. They told me about when they came across a Bigfoot. So I remember either texting or calling Scotty a couple days after that to confirm whether or not that story was true, because up to that point I had not taken it seriously. Scotty and Morgan were a couple years older than me and were, if you're familiar with the Harry Potter books, they were the Fred and George of our school. Very much fun-loving, jokester kind of guys. Hence why I didn't really take their story seriously initially. But we had graduated high school now. We had both lived abroad and had come back. And I remember wanting to get down to the reality of whether this story that I'd been told by them was true. So I called Scotty and I said, "Hey man, do you remember that story that you and Morgan told me about when you guys claimed you see Bigfoot?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "You mind telling me that again? Or were you guys just pulling my leg?" And he's like, "No, man, we weren't pulling your leg. That was something that really happened to us. I'll go to my grave knowing that I saw a Bigfoot." There it was again, a Bigfoot, as indicating that there's more than just one. So I was intrigued and said, "All right, go on, tell me the story." So from what I remember, Scotty told me that this occurred in Camp Merriweather, which is on the Oregon coast. And this took place in the summer. Probably, I would say they were around 15, 16 years old. So this probably was in 2009, 2010. And we both grew up in a church where scouting was important. And so, and it was something we both participated in. He claimed that at this Boy Scout camp, one night, the scout leaders, their scout masters, told them not to go hiking through the camp or through the forest or on the coast at night. And so, of course, Scotty and Morgan, being mischievous young men as they were, said, "We're going to do it anyways." So that evening, Scotty and Morgan go hiking along one of the trails, probably around midnight. And to give you kind of a visual, to their left is the cliff that goes down to where the beach is, and it is midnight, so it's dark, but there was the moon out, according to what Scotty had told me, and this is the summertime, probably in August, so it's probably not too chilly out. Maybe a little brisk, but not much for Oregon. And to their right, you have a field, and beyond that field, you have the forest. So as they're walking along, they see in the field a cow, and Morgan says, "Hey man, you ever been cow tipping before?" And Scotty says, "Nah, man, let's try it." And they start tiptoeing over to this cow, and when they're within about, I want to say 5 to 8 feet of this thing, all of a sudden the cow stands up on two legs, and they quickly realize this is not a cow. As this Bigfoot looks at them in the moonlight, they see that it's dark, covered in hair, and that its hair was matted. Parts of it looked like freeform dreadlocks that were kind of hanging off of its arms and back, and that this thing looked at them for only a few seconds before it bolts. And Scotty told me, man, he's like, so Scotty and I both grew up in the same hometown, and the countryside is not too far from where we live. We both had spent time with friends and relatives and church leaders out in the countryside, and have spent time around time on working on farms and near farm animals and whatnot. And he said, "Riley, you know how fast a horse runs." And I was like, "Of course, yeah, I've seen horse runs. It's kind of crazy how they can run so fast being so big." And he said, "Exactly, man. This thing would have left a horse in the dust. It was so fast." And he said that, of course, this scared him and Morgan so badly that they ran back to their tents and didn't dare tell their scout leaders, who told them not to go, running off in the dark, anything about this. So the story they weren't ashamed to tell anyone, but most people, from what I remember in high school, didn't take them too seriously. And I remember the sincerity in my friend Scotty's voice when he told me, "Dude, this was something that really happened to me and Morgan. We saw something that can't be explained. It was the only way to describe it was a Sasquatch." So after that conversation with Scotty, that made me wonder about the most early Bigfoot story that I could remember hearing in my life, and that was with that came from my Uncle Michael. And I grew up with my cousins, and we were really close. And Michael was one of the uncles that I was closest with in my preteen throughout my teenage years. And I can't remember when this story was first told. I just remember having heard it at least a couple times growing up. And the story goes that Michael is one of 10 kids, and this family of 10 kids were raised by great parents out in Utah, where I currently live. And he told me that this wasn't his story, but his older brother's story. And I can't remember his older brother's name, so we'll call him John. So John had their second oldest brother, who also I don't know, so we'll call him James. So John and James were wanting to pull a prank on the younger siblings. And Michael, being one of those younger siblings, can remember this very clearly. The plan apparently was for James to lead the other siblings through their property, which was out in the countryside, through their property towards the mountains. And for those who are not familiar with the geography of Utah, anywhere where, if you're living in the valley, the mountains are to your east, and they're right there, especially in the areas like Provo, south of Salt Lake City. So which is, I want to say, close to where this story took place. So as they're approaching these mountains where you have plenty of canyons to go hiking up, the prank was going to be that James was going to lead all the kids towards these mountains on what we call a snipe hunt. And as they were hunting, looking for these snipes, the oldest brother John was going to run out and scare all the siblings. Pretty harmless and silly joke. So the story goes, and for those who don't know, snipes, I believe, I think there actually are some species of bird that is called a snipe. But in our family folklore, at least in my memory, snipes were supposed to be kind of like little gnomes. So Michael says that James led him and the siblings out on this hike I want to say it was around twilight. They're in Utah, hiking through their countryside towards the mountains, and all of a sudden they see John just running towards them full speed. And James is all kinds of confused because they had not arrived at the spot where John was supposed to scare them yet, and he thought that John had just jumped the gun. So he turns around and starts to try and, scare the siblings with John as he's getting closer. And the siblings are all confused and they start running back towards the house. And James turns around back to John as he's coming forward and says, "Man, what the heck? You jumped the gun." And John just says, he gets to him, he's panting, and he says, "Dude, you got to get to the house. Run, go." And he's wondering what's going on. And eventually he catches his breath and forces him and James to run back to the house. And as they get there, Michael says he remembers John sitting in the chair next to the fire and just seeing his eyes wider than he'd ever seen them, just white as a ghost. And seeing that his brother was shook up by something, and the parents asked John what had happened, and he told them that he saw a Bigfoot. And the parents, of course, were a little skeptical, but I think they were trying to respect their older son's experience. So Michael remembers that story, and from what I can remember, Michael saying that his brother said he saw was just that it was big and huge and hairy, and that it was you could see the outline clearly as it was getting darker, and that it scared his older brother good enough to make him want to run to the house. And this is a family who is familiar with the fauna around their property. And what made this more compelling was that the next day, apparently in the newspaper, their dad pointed out that the news had reported various sightings of Bigfoot that had been reported to the newspaper all throughout that county in Utah where they were living. So for Michael, my uncle, he said, "I trust what my brother saw, and I don't know anything much more beyond that, but if my brother says it was Bigfoot, it was Bigfoot," And that was my uncle's story. That was the earliest remembered sort of story in my family that I can remember about Bigfoot. So now that I had these sort of 3 stories from Michael's brother, from my buddy Scotty and Morgan, and then Scott on my ferry captain, I felt like I had a decently solid handful of people that I felt like I could trust, who were all claiming the same thing, that in our wilderness there is a big, hulking, scary giant that makes itself known when it apparently feels like it, or when it gets snuck up on. But it's not one that has been documented in our official school books and zoos, but that they claim to have seen it, and that it's more than just an animal. In fact, most of them were I think all 3 of them were of the opinion that it was not just some dumb gorilla, but that it seemed to be something very human about it, and that there was more of a something that felt familiar about it than they were expecting. So now I bring you to sort of phase 2 of my Bigfoot fascination, which is that of extreme curiosity. Because now I've got these people who I know who claim to have seen one. And I want to know for myself if there are more people than just these 3 who I might know who have seen this creature. So from then on, I made it sort of a goal of mine to try and broach the subject with people who I knew had spent time outside, or just really anyone who I thought might have some kind of knowledge about this, because I wanted to know more. All right, that's it for tonight, folks. You're going to be hearing from me in episode 2. Please be sure to listen to the outro as this episode comes to an end. Thanks so much. Thanks for listening to the BLC. Be sure to subscribe and share. And it would be really awesome if you'd be willing to take just a minute to give us a review, as that helps this show out a ton.